So I fully identify as someone who was on the dark side. I was a diet culture creator. I was writing weight loss articles for women's magazines, and it never felt right. I didn't feel like we were making women's lives better because...
Wait, what? So you're the person... Wait. You are the person who was writing
I'm
15 diet tips for...
Yeah, I did some of that. Yeah, get your best.
I'm mad at you.
You
mad
should
at you,
be.
Virginia.
You should be. I've looked back at old pieces that I didn't even think were that bad, and I'm like, oh my God. I'm Virginia Sowell-Smith. I'm the author of Fat Talk, Parenting in the Age of Diet Culture. I also host the Burnt Toast podcast, and I write the Burnt Toast newsletter. Like, portion control was very big. I remember doing a piece on how to slim your dining room, like as if like the lighting and the plates you ate off of would help you lose weight. Like, it was all these little like the 2010s, it was all these like little hacks. Like, it's not a diet, it's a lifestyle change.
And just smaller plates.
Just eat smaller plates. You'll be fine. And like tricking yourself into thinking it would be painless. And then of course it doesn't work. And at the core of it, what I was not questioning at that time, and what I think a lot of us still struggle to question, was the premise of fat is bad. And that's the premise we need to challenge, right?
You had been working in this magazine, as you said, even talking about diet culture. And a few years later, body positivity comes along. And those same magazines, this is what makes that moment unique, those same magazines are now, the think pieces are, well, gee, isn't this great? And I would say we move into what we call the brave phase, where every time a person in a bigger body shows themselves, people are like, you're so brave and confident. And like, how do you do it?
How do you leave the house? Wow.
How do you leave the house?
It's
and this
really
is
amazing.
part of the body positivity movement. And it doesn't necessarily, but it does do a weird thing in the culture where people start to question all the language. Should you say fat or not? Should you say this or not? Should you say that or not? Can you talk about some of the language shifts?
Yeah. As I was having my own personal trajectory from women's magazines over to fat liberation journalism, I was a part of this work where we were saying, you know what, why are we making fat a bad word? Let's reclaim fat. Let's understand that fat is just another way to have a body. You can say someone's fat or thin, just like you'd say they're short or tall. And this can be a neutral descriptor of a body. And I would go even so far to say is it can be a positive descriptor. We know that people do find fat people attractive. We don't want to admit to that. But when you look at like what terms get searched in porn, people find fat bodies attractive. So
the shady but truthful polling of what happens in porn data.
It doesn't lie is all I'm saying.
Sadly.
I'm not saying it's not a complicated...
terrifying, but also true.
But it shows us that a lot of what we've bought into is a multi-billion-dollar industry that profits off telling us, especially women, that if we can keep our bodies as small as possible, we will be healthier, we will be happier, we will have more moral value, we will be all of these things. They're selling us an entire lifestyle based on body size. That has nothing to do with the health conversation. That has everything to do with upholding patriarchal beauty standards that uphold systems of power.
So everything about what you're saying right this second, I am familiar with in a way, right? Mm-hmm. And I recall that moment where it was like there were best-selling books, like Shrill, and then I think that even got made into a TV show. It
sure did, yeah.
There were all these plus-size models who started to come to the forefront. As it does, the fashion world started to say, well, darling, maybe we should consider putting a size 8 on the runway, and then gave themselves applause for that. But the point is, you did have the rise of supermodel stars who were plus size, as it's described. And I should say, as this is happening, it's not like it's happening without critique.
No.
Right? Every time you look in the comments section, there's a bunch of people there saying, why are you saying this is healthy? Why are you saying this looks good? Why are you advocating for this? So It's like it's percolating under the surface what I would say became the backlash.
Yes, I think that's right. I mean, if you ask any semi-public fat person, myself included, I never felt like we made so much progress because the trolls in my DMs, the men who send me emails, all of that has been a steady drumbeat the entire time. So I know we're not changing hearts and minds everywhere, but I think we have made some real gains in building pockets of community.
Enter Ozempic, right? Around 2023. And for me, it starts with a few Hollywood canaries in the coal mine. All of a sudden, some people emerge from that post-pandemic period, not with their pandemic weight, but having lost a tremendous amount of weight. And some of that they would explain away by saying like, oh, I have just been exercising and making healthy choices. But pretty soon, people are actually talking about these drugs, the semaglutide drugs. And then, of course, Oprah weighs in. And as far as I'm concerned, once Oprah weighs in culturally on a weight topic, it has reached saturation point, right?
Agreed.
But what she does is there's a fundamental, she talks about the stigma of being overweight. Mm-hmm. And then people who are on these drugs even talk about the stigma of losing the weight. Like they can't win.
Yeah.
And I want to know what happened to those what happened to those pockets, those communities you talked about that had just finally gotten the culture to think about fat and weight a different way? Are they shocked, surprised, roiled, annoyed? Like, take me back to that point.
All of the above. I think everybody, fat folks are not a monolith. Everybody's feeling all of the feelings.
But what was your group chat? What were your, you know what I mean? Like, what was, let's talk that initial moment.
I think what was interesting was that there are these this has happened before, but what's really happening now is there's this sudden small bit of agreement happening between the industry that's pushing the semaglutide drugs and the fat liberationists, where everyone's suddenly talking about and agreeing that weight stigma exists. And I can tell you, as a journalist who's been reporting on this for 15 years, when I used to talk to obesity researchers, they would completely basically gaslight me and be like, no, fat discrimination, that's not the big concern. People just need to work harder. They just need to count their calories and have willpower and da-da-da-da. And finally, I noticed around a few years before the Ozempic moment really hit that they were starting to change their tune. And they were starting to say, yes, weight stigma is a really serious issue. It really does harm people's lives. And I was like, yeah, no kidding. And so it's like suddenly we were agreeing with each other, except what Oprah says and what Novo Nordisk says and all those folks say is, so isn't it great that now we have a drug to sell you that can fix all of that? Whereas the fat liberationists were saying, so what if we just accepted that body size is largely out of people's control and we treated everyone well, regardless of body size? Like we're finally agreeing on the crux of the issue, that this is a form of systemic bias and social oppression, but we have two different solutions. And so I think some of us felt like, wow, they kind of stole our argument, but took it in a different direction. I think there is a co-opting of fat liberation rhetoric happening.
Meaning what? Like what kind of rhetoric?
Oh, the rhetoric of weights, your weight's not your fault, the weight stigma is real. When Oprah sits down with a whole bunch of folks on a special and has people talk openly about experiencing weight discrimination, that's huge in terms of a cultural moment. That's giving voice to something very real that millions of Americans have been living with. And yet then her solution is, well, don't worry, we can make you thin, so you don't have to experience that anymore. And the problem with that being the solution is it doesn't erase the underlying bias. It only codifies the bias because it says, well, we'll just make it, you just won't be visible as a fat person anymore. Now you won't experience the bias. But nobody had to actually change their minds about how they felt about fat people. No one had to do that work.
The other thing that happened is people in the public eye who lost weight rapidly or who admitted to using these drugs, they sometimes faced backlash from their fans on social media, especially, in particular, here and there, some body positive influencers.
I think it's really important for me to first say that if you believe in fat liberation and body liberation, everybody's bodies belong to them and everyone's allowed to make their own choices. And it is crucial in my work that we don't police people's decisions whether or not to use these drugs. That is a personal choice. Everybody is trying to survive in a fat-phobic world. Thinness is a logical survival strategy when you've been told your whole life your body's a problem. And folks who have large platforms, whether they're a celebrity like Lizzo, whether they're one of the plus-size fashion influencers, I think also have a responsibility to their following, which often includes a lot of young girls, people in eating disorder recovery in very vulnerable spaces. And to have someone you've really admired say, actually, I have always hated being fat and I'm so glad I don't have to do that anymore, that is quietly devastating for lots of people. And it's not that that person's not entitled to that experience, but I think there is a real question of responsibility about how you talk about that responsibly. I actually think Lizzo has been doing a pretty good job of like continuing to stand up for fat people and push back and say this isn't, like she's kind of modeling an interesting way there. But I think other folks have been much more blatant in, finally, I've got something that seems like it's going to work. So forget that whole thing I told you about loving your curves. Like I didn't love mine at all. And that's, of course, really upsetting because where does that leave everyone who's fatter than you? What are you actually, you can say, oh, I'm just talking about me, but everyone in a bigger body around you watching your content knows you're not just talking about you.
There also seems to be a broader cultural backlash that's happening at the same time with this revolution in weight loss drugs. And I want to know how you see it. Because I can't tell if I am really seeing it, but this sense that we're back in terms of traditional looks, traditional body shapes, like that. We're done with all that weird diversity.
I mean, if you look at what's been happening with the skinny talk hashtag on TikTok, I do think we're seeing, I do think like runways went back to thinner models again. There has been a resurgence, although again, as a public fat person, I would say it never really went away. Like, I don't think thin, young white women became a persecuted class at any point.
But I was just reading in The Guardian, they did some reporting recently about how some of the plus size models who had gotten a lot of runway work have seen a precipitous drop off.
Yeah. And even when plus size models were getting work, they were often straight size models who were being padded to look plus size for that particular moment.
I'm sorry, what?
Yeah.
Wait.
Yeah.
I thought they were just really size 10 and 12 and we were told they were plus size.
That was also happening, yes. But, this is where anti-fatness, even when we were in our quote heyday, it was okay to be fat in a certain way. It wasn't okay to have like double chins, right? It was okay to have curves. It was okay to have like, if you could have still an hourglass figure, so like.
And a lot of hair.
Yeah. So much hair. So much hair. Yes. So there was always like, okay, fine, we're okay with certain types of fatness, but not other types of fatness. And that was impacting who was getting cast in modeling work for sure.
But now just fewer people who are overweight are getting that work. And actually, can I say overweight? What's the rule?
Fat liberationists, we prefer you just say fat. But that is a loaded word. A lot of people have a hard time reclaiming that.
I have not reclaimed that one.
No, I understand. It's okay.
I don't say the N-word either. There's certain I know the youngs like to reclaim, but I'm like, what if we just left it?
What if we just left it?
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's powerful, like for me as a fat person to be able to say fat because it's a way of saying like, you can't turn that into an insult. Like, this is fine. This is a fact about my body that I'm very comfortable with. I think for folks, when you're talking about others, we use the words people ask to be, like ask people what they want to be described as and use that, or use more neutral terms like bigger body, I think is a little bit. The problem with words like overweight and obese is that they have been so pathologized and they have the medical community has used them to treat people in bigger bodies as if we are fundamentally diseased and broken. And so a lot of us have had really negative experiences with those words, and they experience them as more harmful.
This comes to my other point, which is the overlap. There's so many trends overlapping in this one moment. Mm-hmm. Like, permit me a moment to try and gather my thoughts of like wellness culture, right? Where doing things to your body, optimizing your body is like a way of life and also a way of status. Mm-hmm. There's also the backlash to wokeness, quote unquote, that would rather use the word fat, right? And would rather use the word overweight and to say all the things you just said to me would be policing a person's language. Mm-hmm. Then you have the fashion and beauty industries kind of turning away as a result of both of the things I mentioned. It's like a perfect storm to return to the norm.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's not an accident that all of that is happening at this particular political moment where we are seeing, fat is inherently political. It doesn't
So
always.
you don't think it's just the drugs?
I think it's the drugs. And then I also think it's to do with the fact that we are seeing a stripping back of women's rights, reproductive freedoms, like access to our own bodies is under attack from so many directions. And if you can keep women in particular focused on pursuing thinness, you can get away with a lot of other stuff. Like, that's a really good distraction strategy. If we keep women focused on my access to cultural capital is through my appearance, is through my body. My body is my major self-help project. I have to spend all this time at the gym. I have to spend all this time pursuing, different beauty work. That doesn't leave you a lot of time to go to protests, right? That doesn't leave you a lot of time to get angry about what's happening in the world. And I'm not saying people are not angry, but I do think it is not an accident that the archetypes of beauty that we're seeing reinforced right now, you can see very clear, when you look at MAGA, when you look at MAHA women, like there's a beauty standard there that's so labor intensive that we're seeing held up as an ideal now.
The other part of that is you also in the White House have a voice in R.F. Kennedy Jr. for the wellness community, right? And the Make America Healthy Again movement. I mean, it's more than a seat at the table. But is it incompatible to have, again, the people who are in charge of kind of our health industry out there talking about healthy eating and exercise and the benefits of those things?
I mean, Kennedy has a very well-established track record as being deeply fat phobic. He has given many speeches where he talks about how back in his day, you only saw fat people as freaks at the circus. That is a way of dehumanizing fat Americans and saying that we are somehow this scourge on the nation. He is trying to other great swaths of the American population to further his political agenda.
But then also, again, living alongside that world of the medical community that is saying, for instance, childhood obesity is a problem and it's causing other chronic issues. So again, just trying to square this idea that like these ideas don't come from nowhere, but the way they're landing now, it feels like they have a particular potency in this moment when drugs are available to somehow, quote unquote, fix what people see as a problem.
I mean, what I come back to is if you care about Americans eating healthy foods, you can regulate the food industry and you can make healthy food more affordable. You can increase SNAP benefits. You can increase welfare benefits. You can increase WIC benefits. Like, you can make it possible for Americans to have access to healthy food. We will probably see chronic rates of disease improve. That is science. We can do all of that without making fat jokes, without talking about weight loss as the answer. We can do all of that without ever talking about fatness. And the reason they talk about fatness is because that is what sells. That is the bias that they can tap into to get people angry and get people blaming people. But that does not promote health. Shame is not health promoting behavior.
It is free.
It is.
If you want to cut the budget, it's a lot cheaper.
Just tell people it's all their fault. And if they could just lose weight, I mean, that's, yeah, for sure. That is cheaper than funding SNAP. But I personally know what I'm voting for.
I want to talk about the impact of this on younger generations, who I think a lot of us thought were going to have maybe a different relationship with food and body positivity and diet culture than maybe it turns out they are. When you look at TikTok, for instance, there's a rise of, as you mentioned earlier, skinny talk, which is a world of people finding ways to talk about weight. Can you give an example of some things you've seen that feel familiar to you from your early part of your career, or that feel oddly retrograde to you among Gen Z?
Well, I just wrote about an influencer named Liv Schmidt who runs a program called the Skinny Society. And I sort of dread even mentioning her by name because
People go look it up.
I don't want to drive business to her. But when I went through her content to write about her for Burnt Toast, I realized every slide was basically a tip that I had either like edited or read in a women's magazine in 1997. It was all this stuff about like, don't drink your calories, thin as a mindset, like just like this sort of age-old diet advice that like, I don't even need to tell you it, Audie. Like we know it. It's in our brains. You can't, like, it was drilled into us from childhood. And so to see that, and she's 23, so to see a 23-year-old building a business around telling women, and a lot of young girls follow her, a lot of high school students are in her program, the same stuff that is so damaging. It's such a restrictive way to live. It's such, it's fundamentally dangerous to be telling people to do like 2 or 3 workouts a day and dropping their calories to really dangerously low levels. Like this is not health promoting at all. And yeah, it's discouraging to see that on the rise. At the same time, I get a lot of hope from the younger generations. I'm a parent of a middle schooler, and the conversations I hear my kid and her friends having are very different from the conversations I was having in middle school, which was weight loss, let's not eat the potato chips.
Yeah, middle school is like where that socialization and policing really, and the hammer comes down.
Yeah, it does. But I've had multiple middle schoolers or their moms reach out to me and say, so my health teacher just gave us a calorie counting log as a school assignment. I'm not doing that, right? That's not healthy for me. And like kids recognizing that and pushing back. And, my own 11-year-old, they showed like a video talking about how bad sugar is for you. And she sent an email in to the teacher and was like, I actually think you're forgetting that middle school is like a really vulnerable time for eating disorders. And maybe we shouldn't shame sugar and da-da-da. And like, okay, she's my kid. She's hearing it at the dinner table.
I was about to say, she's particularly well versed.
Yeah. But it came from her. I was like, wait, what are you doing? And she was like, well, we were all talking about it. Like, why are you showing us this video? Like, so I think the work that we're doing hasn't gone to waste. And maybe the fact that it's ramped up so much on the other side is proof of the progress we're making, right? Like they're getting louder because we've gotten loud. And so now we just have to stay loud and keep getting louder.
I know for me personally, I think a lot now about how I talk about food around my little kids. They're boys, but like obviously there's rising concerns about boys and their perception of weight. And like, I don't want them hiding food, right? I don't want it to be a guilty pleasure, some kind of snack. I don't want dessert to be a guilty pleasure. It's really hard to try and make food neutral, as it turns out, and our instinct to eat neutral. And I've also got all this like competing and conflicting health information in my head about how I should be talking about it. How do you think about it? How has that changed, as I said, in this moment where it's in the air that these drugs are here, there's another way, people are talking differently about stigma?
The way I think about it is I actually don't think food is neutral. I think food is a source of joy and connection and has a lot of meaning in our lives. And we don't need to be ashamed of that. We don't need to apologize for that. What I want my children to understand about food is that it is available, it is safe, all foods are safe, and that they don't need to feel anxious about how much they're eating, which foods they're eating. Like, I don't want them focusing on the specifics of that as a thing that they feel like they're getting wrong. And what I actually think of the dinner table is less of a place where I'm trying to teach them, quote, perfect nutrition. Because what the research actually shows us is that if kids have enough to eat, nutrition tends to work itself out over the course of sometimes many days, weeks. Like, they'll hit the food groups. You'll get there. It will be okay.
Even if it seems like they're just having buttered pasta every single night?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay.
Like weeks and weeks of buttered pasta, and then suddenly they'll eat like nothing but peas for dinner. And you'll be like, what happened there? There is this like ebb and flow, which is really hard to watch as parents, but you can trust it. So what I focus much more on is how can food be a form of connection for us? And how can my kids use the experience of eating to trust their bodies? And so what that means is if I have a food on the table and I say, oh, do you want some of the broccoli? Or sometimes it's, do you want some of these cookies, but they're a different flavor than the cookies we usually have? And they say no. I respect the no because I want my kids to know that their no has power and should be respected.
Even if it's a no against broccoli?
Yes.
Or, Okay.
Because if they say no to the broccoli and I say, okay, they know that they get to say no to things that don't feel safe or good in their bodies. And when we zoom out a little bit as parents, I've got girls and I've got, girls on the cusp of teenagehood. I really want them to know that they get to say no to anything that doesn't feel safe or good for their bodies.
But you feel like as parenting, your job is to kind of urge them / force them into having these things that are good for them. They just don't know it yet, like the broccoli.
Well, what I love to ask parents then is, okay, remember the food you were forced to eat as a child, and it was probably like boiled broccoli or Brussels sprouts. Do you love that food now that you were forced to sit at the dinner table and finish? Probably not. Maybe you love it if like you roast it and put it in like some, a better, but like you probably don't want to eat a plate of boiled Brussels sprouts that you were forced to eat at 7. So if my goal is not compliance and forcing my children to eat according to some like set of rules that I've decided is the best way, if my goal is they feel safe and comfortable in their bodies at meals and maybe over time learn to love a wider variety of food that includes things like Brussels sprouts, then me forcing the Brussels sprouts is only going to undermine that goal that they might someday love them. Whereas me having Brussels sprouts on the table alongside foods they do like, and I enjoy eating the Brussels sprouts and they see me enjoying them. And over time, maybe they get curious because maybe I served them with like a different sauce tonight or something's a little different. And they're like, oh, maybe I do want to try a bite. And let them get there in their own time. You have a much better chance of raising a kid who is building like a lifelong relationship with food that has curiosity, that, is interested in trying these different things. And that's because it starts from a place of felt safety.
Do you think our kids will know about the body positive movement?
Well, my kids do, but
your kids will be writing essays about them.
They don't really have a choice.
My kids will be subscribing to it. But will they be in a world where that's still a thing?
I think so. I mean, as much as like the darkness of skinny talk is really there, I'm also seeing so much great content coming out of Gen Z on fat liberation. And when I was interviewing kids for my book, I was interviewing a lot of teenagers for the book, they would use terms like fat phobia, like, oh yeah, I know what that is. Like, that's totally, like, it was fascinating.
It wasn't some wacky woke thing.
They were like, that's fat phobia. Like, they were totally calling it out. And so I think it's both and it's really important that we talk openly with our kids about what anti-fatness is, what fat phobia is, so that they can name it and know it when they're seeing it. And because that gives them some distance. If you know that this is a bias that exists out there, when you experience it, you don't internalize it quite as deeply. You're like, oh, they're the problem because this person is being biased against me. My body's not the problem. And that's our goal, right, is to raise kids who understand that their bodies are never the problem to solve. And so that then they can advocate for themselves and they can be good allies if they're thin kids or, be proud fat kids. And that's great.
Can the body positivity movement survive the Ozempic moment?
I think so. I don't think we're going anywhere. I think it has... One thing I will say about the current conversation is it has brought a little more nuance to some of the fat liberation work, where I think we've realized what I said earlier about we cannot police people's individual choices. We've realized we have to make room in this movement for folks who are choosing for their own reasons to pursue thinness, whether through Ozempic or through whatever means, and want to stand up for fat folks, that you can do both, that you are welcome in this movement, and that this is not that's the other guys who would say you don't belong here, right? Like, we are the inclusive folks. So I think that's been, in a weird way, good that we've had to drill into that and say, like, yeah, we're not about demonizing personal choices. That's the other people. We're here to say, like, your body belongs to you. And it is really hard to be in a fat body in a fat phobic world. There are logical reasons that people would pursue thinness as a survival strategy. And we can keep working towards a world where that isn't required of you.
Just to put it out there, for me, as someone, I moved from radio to television, and of course, my looks and my weight became much more of a atmospheric sort of concern for me, because the people you're sitting next to, the people you are on camera with are very slim. the clothes you need to wear. There are lots of times where I have really felt like, now I get it why everybody would be doing this, because
totally.
why be the only person who's not doing it
Yeah.
when it could be so easy? And I wouldn't have to feel this way, whatever that this way is. The atmospheric pressure to lose weight is now almost a class and status one.
Yes.
It's almost,
yes.
Am I describing that correctly?
No, you absolutely are. And, I'm a person in this world. I absolutely experience the pressure because we all experience the pressure. I go into doctor's appointments extremely guarded and anxious about how is this going to come up? How am I going to be treated for this? Do I have my talking points? Am I ready to advocate? And that's exhausting. And, even more, quote, superficially, many of my friends, I'm friends with a lot of thin people, and it's many of my friends are thin. And so there are many rooms I go into where I feel aware of the difference. And that's something that that you have to take a minute with. For me personally, pursuing thinness would not be health promoting for a variety of reasons. Pursuing thinness via Ozempic, I don't believe would be health promoting for me for a variety of reasons, because I think even though it feels like, quote, the easy way, I actually know lots of people on it who've had very mixed experiences in terms of side effect management. You have to stay on it to maintain the loss. You also still have to change eating habits. And I know for me, changing eating habits, becoming obsessive about exercise triggers disordered thought patterns.
With the mainstreaming of weight loss drugs, with the health and wellness movement, with this kind of backlash culturally, is there a worry that the world of people in your movement will get smaller? And that some will even lose it, some will leave it by choice?
I'm actually not so worried about that. I mean, I still have people finding these conversations daily, weekly. I think, if anything, we might be in a little dip, and then we're going to see we're going to see it come back, because trying to put yourself back on the hamster wheel of intentional weight loss, even with something like Ozempic in the mix, it always leads to the same set of outcomes, which is most people who pursue this end up frustrated, end up feeling like it doesn't work for them, end up feeling like failures, because that's how it's sort of designed to work. And so then that's usually when people say, wait a second, what if I didn't have to pursue this? What if pursuing thinness wasn't my part-time job on top of my otherwise full and very busy life? And then they start to ask questions. And I have a lot of faith in people's ability to think critically about these choices, and recognize when frankly, they're being treated really badly by all of these larger cultural forces that are telling them that, no, keep pursuing thinness at any cost. So I think there are certainly folks who, what I have seen that's been sort of personally saddening has actually less been fat folks leaving the movement and saying fat liberation is no longer for me. I'm so excited to be on Ozempic. I'm not really seeing that. What I am seeing is straight size folks. Straight size is the term we use for thin folks, anyone who doesn't need to wear plus size clothing. I'm seeing straight size folks who I maybe at one point considered allies doing Ozempic because they want to get back in their pre-baby jeans, or they want to lose some weight before vacation. And that's them giving lip service to their own anti-fatness in a way that I think they weren't doing a year or two ago or 3 years ago. And that's been sort of personally disappointing to see, oh, okay, you think it's okay for me to be fat, but it's not okay for you to be fat. And that tells me a lot about what you think about fatness.
What's your advice for people who are going through a version of that disappointment themselves?
I think we have to remember that, it's free to unfollow. So if these are celebrities or influencers, you can curate your feeds and not have that noise. That's really helpful for me a lot of the time, to just disengage from that content. If it's people in your personal lives, I think it's okay to set boundaries. It's okay to say I'm really happy that you're feeling good. This isn't a great conversation for me to be a part of. And I need you to respect that. And obviously that's going to go well in some cases and terribly in other cases. And that's why probably 60% of the emails I get are, how do I deal with my mom? So like, it's really tough stuff. And I think it's also okay that we're feeling disappointed. It's okay to feel let down by someone who, whether it's a celebrity who gave lip service to agreeing with you on this issue, or someone in your personal life you thought you could count on as an ally. Like, it's okay to be disappointed that that turned out not to be the case. I think we can hold that disappointment and we can try to find some compassion for the people who are disappointing us, right? Like, we're all swimming in the same soup. They're dealing with, like, you know, what you were saying about being on TV now, bringing a whole new set of pressures. Like, we don't know the nuances of the different pressures people are living with and what's driving them to make those choices. But we can be sure that the pressure is there. So trying to find some compassion that you're disappointed by someone who is a victim of the same system you are. And it's really the system we're mad at. It's really the industry is profiting off this, you know, the larger cultural discourse that we're mad at, and trying whenever possible to redirect our anger to those systems.
Well, Virginia, thank you so much for being willing to talk to us about this. I know it's not easy. It's sort of a strange moment, I'm sure, in your world. But thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for having me. This was a wonderful conversation.